So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. The next gentleman we want to bring up, I don't think anybody knows him. This is his first time speaking in front of an audience. He's a bit nervous. He's never done this before.
I'm taking
it. Does anybody not know Vitaly?
It's okay. It's a safe place.
I've heard. Yeah. So earlier on, when I mentioned about people wanting to, Vitaly is one of the gentlemen that in this space is just constantly writing great articles, and constantly wanting to improve state of UX UI in globally, really. So I'm very honored.
So this has been my role for a while, right? And again, this is actually very much different, probably a little bit different from what you are working on. But my experience when looking at interfaces like this, right, or interfaces like this, or interfaces like this, or even interfaces like this, they all have a lot of similarities in them to me, because when I look at this, when I look at any of this, I see the same thing over and over. What do you see? Oh, you see teeth. Okay. And if you're working on a dentist application, then lucky you, right? Scoring the point. But in general, what do you see here actually? Cognitive overload, you could say. Anything else?
Loads of information.
Information, data. There's just a lot of data. All of these applications have the same thing in common. They have a lot of data. There are actually multiple dimensions of that. On the one hand, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of ways to control or manipulate or edit or change data. We have also a way to export, import, manipulate it in some other way, kind of bringing more data in. You can have different views with geographical data. With any kind of data, there's just a lot of data. And sometimes, and that's where the complexity really comes in, you have dependencies. When you have dependencies, and when I walk in a project of that kind, I'm absolutely lost. I literally have no idea where to start because I don't know that domain, right? And when I walk in, any domain that you're working on, I probably would feel the same way. So it feels, it's not easy to kind of feel comfortable in that space. Now, right now, my space is a little bit different because right now, I kind of need to, maybe not jump here, but kind of escape, right, and show it right away. I hope you can still hear me. Everyone, I'm going to try to be very loud as I can. But my space these days is actually this wonderful website. Oh, not that one. No, not Europark. Europarl. That's different. Always the same story. Always happens to me. So that's my space, right? And when you look at it, it doesn't feel too complex compared to the previous ones, does it? Right? It doesn't feel that complicated. I mean, what we have in front of us is a logo. Logo, give me a break. Logo. We have cards. We have some information stuff, carousels, some visualization, some filters, right? More cards, buttons. I mean, it's 2023. We should know how to do buttons at this point. That's not hard. And cards. Now, this is probably the most difficult project I've ever worked in my life for the last 2 years, 2.5 years now. Why is that? What's so complex about it? Well, stakeholders, that could be one. Anything else? Yeah, the complexity here is that you have a lot of layers, very, very different layers, not only in terms of stakeholders and politics, you have a lot of stuff. Now, obviously, European Parliament's content needs to live in 24 languages, official languages. Everything that's being published has to be published in 24 languages. You have a lot of data that's been accumulated over the years. You think about multimedia, photo, audio, video. This is a billions of data stored all over. Search is complicated. There are plenty of search engines, tons of CMSs, and all of that kind of combined doesn't make it easy. So when you walk in an organization like this, or in a company, or organization like that, it often feels very weird and very kind of difficult to even make sense of what we have. And one thing that I started working on, and many of my colleagues as well, kind of to try to see where we're going with this, kind of to have some strategy in place, is to think about design KPIs. Anybody has some sort of design KPIs in the organization? Right, self. This has become kind of a more important trend or thing over the years. And of course, when we're thinking about those metrics, UX metrics, it seems like a dashboard, metrics, dashboard. No. That's absolutely not what I'm talking about here. Metrics, that's different. We need to think about what we actually should be caring about. Now, specifically, when I look at some of the metrics that we see being used or being kind of very often discussed, at least in organizations, small and large, right? This would be very specific things. Like many businesses will care about NPS. Anybody measures NPS? Yes. Well, NPS, there are also other things like CSAT, CSAT, right? There are many of them. Very often you will also get things like task success rate. You will also get time on task. This is much more on the UX side of things. This is very close to us, right? And then sometimes customer effort score. Customer effort score, right? So why am I talking about this in the first place when I'm designing and thinking about designing for complex UIs? Well, because at this point, I need to be able to figure out what we're doing in terms of design or UX before we design anything. So usually I would spend, 3 to 4 months working on a kind of an outline or the idea of what we're going to do and selling that idea and validating that idea before designing a single pixel on the screen. So when we start designing, we know that we're designing the right thing. How do we do that? Well, in the context of European Parliament, we would go ahead and define actual KPIs. Let me just jump in there to show them right away. I always jump in slides. I do apologize for that. Here we go. Let me just show you, right? So yeah, I can show it right away. That would be things, for example, like this. Hold on. It's very difficult. Here we go, like this. This will be the KPIs that we actually have to define first before we're even designing anything. Specifically in the context of the parliament, maybe, this looks like this, right? And there are many different things that kind of flow into it. The very first thing that we do, right, is doing research, trying to understand what is the environment, and then looking into what the stakeholders are and trying to understand what the goals are. Now, the important thing for me is, whenever I work in a project like that, I need to do the very first thing is not even looking and defining those kind of KPIs. I forgot to mention it. The first thing is asking for this beauties. Org charts are important. They're very important. They're very important for me. Why are they so important to me as a designer? I'm a UX designer. I'm not a business analyst. Right? I'm not a marketing person. I'm not sales. I'm just a UX designer. So why is it so important to me?
They show you a landscape and they also show you who you talk to.
Right, excellent. They show a landscape and what to talk to. They show you the relationships. Well, I might be here. This little tiny dot. But the number wasn't working for this one. But it's a nice chart. It's nice to see. Maybe. Right? So if I'm right here, I need to know who I need to speak to, who I need to speak to, who I need to speak to, who they need to speak to, in order to sell my idea, to kind of to make an impact. Right? This is a little bit closer to where I am. A little bit closer, but then there are multiple layers. And kind of understanding what the relationships are is very, very important, right? Because I will need to be able to sell things to them, to sell my ideas to them. Now, again, speaking about those things, before I design anything, right, I kind of need to really go ahead and decide to define those kind of KPIs that we have here, right? There are plenty of them. A very common one is the top task success rate. That basically means we're going ahead and we're just defining what are some representative tasks that people in that environment in which we're operating are doing. And then most importantly, how successful they are in completing those tasks, how much time they need to complete those tasks, how many errors occur as they're trying to complete those tasks, and how big the recovery rate for them is. So everything is very much based on evidence and data. The interesting one is, that one is at the bottom, which is the CO2 footprint. Now, the big ambition behind the new European Parliament's website is to be the most digitally sustainable digital experience organization in the world. What does it even mean, digital sustainability? That seems to be a little bit of an abstract concept, right? So in that case, we need to reduce waste, of course, delete a lot of stuff, archive a lot of stuff, clean up a lot of mess, right? Just to make sure that things are actually as clean as they could be. I just only now realized that I'm in the wrong deck. This is why I have to change. I think that would be better. Yeah, sorry, it's totally messed up. That's okay, happens. Because I think that when we look at organizations, at any scope, why do we set up those KPIs? It's because there are usually 5 things that every business cares about. 5. Not more than that. Sometimes it's a bit more detailed, sometimes less. My design decisions, every single decision I make, has to contribute in some positive way to help businesses reach those decisions, or reach those priorities, or reach those objectives. That would be typically increase revenue, decrease costs, increase new business, increase existing business, and increase shareholder value. Now, it might feel very daunting. I'm just improving the user flow here. How can that contribute to increasing shareholder value? That's a little bit far, right? So we can actually bring it down a little bit closer to us, like this, right? Most SaaS products are sold care about acquisition, retention, engagement, customer satisfaction, cost of service. Cost of service is important because most of the time we don't necessarily have to improve revenue, right? The second bit, decreasing costs, can be very, very significant. So why am I talking to you about this? Because if you can frame your design decision as an enabler of reaching those priorities, you can actually sell anything, right? And that's really, really important. There is, however, one very significant problem we have in our community, I think, and that's actually coming from a talk from Andy Bott where he was speaking about it. Every time you go on LinkedIn, every time you go on Twitter, or whatever, X, whatever it's called now, right? Wherever you go, right, UX is the heart of everything, isn't it? It's the heart of everything. It's like it connects the technology, the design, and business. It lives in the heart of a product or system or anything, right? That's not at all how my experience in most organizations is. There is a reason why you might be the only designer on the team with 20 developers and 400 marketing people. Probably not your experience, right? But this is actually normal. This is not true. This is not how the world operates. If anything, at best, if there is at least one designer, one researcher on the team, right? At best, you're one of the small satellites around everything else. And everything else is actually often very, very important, or even more important, right? Obviously, if you think about these priorities that businesses have, it shouldn't be very surprising that they care so much about sales and marketing. Because it literally drives revenue, it drives the shareholder value, right? We're just one of the small satellites that's circling around, and this is important, it always feels to many organizations, that's really took a different route, this talk today, but into many organizations, designers appear to be very needy, right? Because we want more. We want more testing. We want more time for prototyping. We want more time to do the design work. We want to have more time to, to explore and discover, because design on its own as a process, it's very difficult to predict. It's a creative process, very difficult to predict, right? But everybody else, in many way or the other, especially, of course, leadership and management, they live in a very different world. They're very much driven by constraints. They cannot give you as much as you want. So this is where the tension comes from between, let's say, marketing and design, or design and development, and design and everybody else except research. Designers and researchers are usually friends, as we should be, right? So what is the point of this then? Well, if I look again at those things that I actually displayed earlier, like what we actually do with the European Parliament. It's a little bit all over the place, but you will still get the idea, right? When I look at what we're doing there and how we're actually working there, the important bit is really being able to sell the ideas before designing anything. So that usually relies on one simple thing that we're using, which is called TPI, Task Performance Indicator. Remember I mentioned top tasks, right? And all of this again happens before we even dive into design at all. What we do is we try to figure out how can we measure the success of our design before we create it. First, we try to figure out what are the most important things. They're always the same. They're always the same. We always focus on success time and success rates. How successful our application is in helping people achieve their top tasks. Top tasks being like the main activities that they want to perform there, right? It also requires us to have a very clear baseline first and test what we are doing there. We don't need a lot of people for that. Usually you will see that you get to a stable outcome with 18 people that you bring into the environment. So you figure out what the tasks are. I'll get to it in a moment, right? You bring 18 people and they will be trying to complete those exercises, those tasks. Usually it takes around an hour. And usually you need 18 people, 10 to 12 tasks. And then you'll get a success score, and you also measure the time, right, that they will need to complete it. Of course, before we even do that, we need to define representative segments of users. That depends. Like typically you would have maybe 3 different segments of users. Depends on how many personas you have in your organization, right? More than that, and then you end up with a really long queue because you actually have like only 18 people that you want to bring in, right? So if you have more than 3 segments, it's becoming a bit more difficult. It could be, for example, frequent, infrequent users. Different locations, right? Within the European Parliament, we need to look into at least 5 countries around the European Union, right? That could also be the frequency of use, like how popular, or not popular, how heavy users they are, right? Are they common, frequent users or not? Like those kind of things would be quite important. And we need to get 30 to 40 participants who can participate in that test. Because half of them is probably going to drop off. That makes sense, everyone, so far? We basically just try to define what the success is. But then comes the important bit. And the important bit is defining the tasks per segment. That usually means around 10 to 12 different tasks, right? And every single participant needs to be in position to be able to complete that task individually, right? Short, clear, decisive tasks. Here's examples of that, like from the OECD, right? We basically say, well, what do people do there in that environment? Well, they access and submit country surveys. They compare data. They retrieve statistics. They browse publications. They access and review working papers. That's what people do there, right? Well, let's figure out what would be representative tasks that they can do. And very simple, actually. Okay, here's the question. What are OECD's latest recommendations regarding Japan's healthcare system? Right? And the thing is, when we do this kind of testing, right, we bring a person in, it's usually one-to-one interview and on Zoom, right? We do not ask them to share their face, but they're sharing the screen as they try to complete an exercise. We start measuring time right away when they actually read it, so they get this notification. Here's the task. Go. We don't speak, they don't speak. I think that we often think about this think aloud protocol. If you're doing UX research, you'll probably have heard of that, right? But what we learned is that when people speak through the experience, first of all, they imagine the world that doesn't really exist in their head. People are really not always great in articulating their thoughts, right? That's one thing. And on the other hand, whenever they speak, that also slows down their task completion time. Because that's not what they do at home when they have to complete the task. So I don't speak, they don't speak, we give them the task, go. They cannot go back to me and ask me, what was that? What does it mean? No, no, no. We have to be very careful in designing those tasks, right? And then they just do it. And then the second one is, in 2018, was Vietnam on the list of countries that received official development assistance? Yes or no? Right? Or number 5, what are the 3 main topics of the OECD Global Index report of 2020? Now, if you look at all those questions, they all have one thing in common. What is that? Yes?
They're not actually the top tasks. Like they're not explicitly.
Yeah, they're not specifically, they're not abstract to the point that, okay, access a particular survey reviews, because people don't think about it this way. This is a very general overview, right? But they very much often focus on specific tasks that they haven't had. And as you were saying, right, this task, or it's probably wrong to call them tasks, it's questions, right, at this point. But you could see them as tasks, right? They have exactly one right answer. The point is not for them finding the right page. Oh my God, I've seen things where people say, oh yeah, I want it on the right page. Yes, I did it. No, but that's not the point. The point is whether they can find the information or not, right? So we're asking, what is that information? They give us an answer, and very often they will want to know if they're right. It's like a game, right? Because it's like they have 12 tasks and they want to get 100%. And many of them are going to be pleasers, right? And they would go and they would go and they would spend 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes going through the entire site and using search and iterating the search query and everything to just get to the right answer. But you would tell them, okay, we can mark it as a fail at this point. No. Let them keep going. Let them keep going. But people don't do that. So whenever somebody goes beyond 5 minutes, that you can write it down as a fail. You don't have to tell them that. Whenever you get to the point where somebody is like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and they're still on the home page looking around, that means they either didn't understand the question, which can also happen, right? Or this is a fail as well. Actually, a very straightforward thing. There is nothing magical around that. Then we run the test. We bring 10 to 12 people. You will probably need approximately 1 hour for each, right? Remote works, right? It's very similar to like moderated usability testing, but in usability testing, you want to explore a little bit more about what specifically people are struggling with, and maybe we will ask questions. We usually don't have time for that here. That's just not going to work. And then as the test is being running, no talk allowed. No hints, no guidance, no conversation, no smiling, no judgment. That's very difficult for me because I try to be a nice person. I need to be very cold and brutal and to the point. No answers to confirmation, no background noise, and in general, as realistic as possible, right? And out of that, we create those kind of reports when we're evaluating for each task. It will look like this. Success rate times, right? Nothing fancy here. By the way, it's all fully documented. So if you look at it for the European Commission, right, those were some of the tasks by the current European Union law governing investigations by the European Anti-Fraud Office, by the opening date for small businesses to submit the biotechnology proposals, and so on, right? And if you go on that link, you'll find this full PDF report, 120 pages, with all the examples and some samples from the usability studies, so from interviews, right, as we were debriefing people if we had the time, right? It will look very much like this. Task 1, right? 20% success rate, 80% failure rate. That's pretty bad, right? And also, of course, if you look at all the details, like task completion time, you see the distribution of that as well. All right? And you keep going, and you have, again failure rate, 47%. So what do you do with that? What's a good score? The good score is 80% success rate. That would be an indicator that something is working well. Typically, it's very difficult to get to 80% success rate because people are strange creatures, right? It doesn't matter what you do, people will find a way to tweak it in a way that works for them, but not for everybody else, right? And so you end up in a situation where 80% success is a very, very high score, right? So what do you do with it then? So you run it once, you establish the baseline, right? And your baseline would be top class success rate, 80%. That would be one. The other one would be, people need like 4 minutes for that task. Should we make it shorter? Can we make it shorter? Maybe it's actually a critical one, an important one. Maybe a patient needs to be able to see something faster or make something faster. Or maybe the other way around, the doctor needs to be able to see things faster. How do we speed it up? So your design is now not measured by how elegant it is. Who cares, right? It's measured by this. How much time people need to actually get it done. That's the most important one. And that changes the entire organization as well, right? Because eventually now we get into this point where everything you're doing is measured by this, right? And you could say, well, yeah, that works for tasks, but then what about complex applications? Now, we are working in a complex space, but what about search? Well, you do the same thing. It's just going to be a slightly different metric. For search, we do a very simple thing. If you have a very important search that you see people using a lot, we need to test how effective it is. How do you do that? Not by looking at how often we update our search engine, and not by switching to another new search engine, which seems to be cooler or nicer. We just go ahead and say, okay, let's take a look at 1,200 search queries that came our way from our users last year. We take them, we go to our experts in our domains. We give them this list of top 100 queries that came our way, and they give us a list of 2 free pages or features or products or whatever that would be very representative, canonical almost, for these queries. So we have 100 search queries, we have approximately 300 pages here, or else links, features, whatever. Right? We do the mapping. Okay, we're now searching for that thing. What does show up? Does any of the first 3 show up? That people actually, the experts in the domain actually listed, and then you get the score from that, how many of them show up on average. Typically, in a regular environment, it would be something between 2 to 4% success rate. 2 to 4% success rate, that's a disaster. This is why most of the time, in complex environments, search is a disaster. Again, for a very simple reason. Think about 24 languages, content available since 1997, right? And it kind of keeps going and going. This is where you end up in a really, really difficult place, right? But then you can measure the success of your search. So your search team is now measured by what their score is for search quality, based on that. Not by making changes to filters, but that might not have any impact at all, but we're actually focusing on things that matter here. If you do have, let's say, a lot of filters, would be the same story. If you want people to be using filters effectively, we need to track how many filters that people set per session. If you actually have a very complex environment, filters can actually help navigate to the right place, find the right data. So if they use more filters, effectively, they might get to that right data faster. Kind of the same story, right? So you basically do that, and by the end of the day, you end up measuring, this is where the last bit comes in, right? Measuring it over time to track that you as a design team are on the right track. How do we do that? Depending on the velocity of the team, and the size of the team, and I have to say, on the willingness of your organization, right? You'll be bringing in, every 6 to 12 months, 18 people in, giving them the same tasks, and seeing how well they're performing. If the success rate is getting better, right? And also if the success time is getting better as well, improves over time. And that's how you actually do your measurements. So when you look at this design KPIs that I established, these are exactly the things that we're actually looking at now to improve. Now, ironically, the interesting bit about all of this is that one of the main goals, just to give you an idea of that, for the European Parliament's project was to improve digital sustainability of, for example, multimedia center. Now, multimedia center in the European Parliament has a lot of data, audio, photo, videos, 4K, plenary, like live streaming sessions that are happening every now and again, right? That's kind of a big deal. How do we do that from the perspective of what I was showing before? Well, the worst thing I could do is say, oh, let's redesign it. Let's make it a little bit nicer, clean up typography, white space here and there. That doesn't matter. I mean, it has an impact, but it doesn't matter at scale, right? So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to see if there are any tools that allow you to track, right, how we're performing. Now, this is one of them. This is Website Carbon Calculator, which gives you a number, 0.22 on the top. Let me just play it again. 0.221 or 22, right? So every time a page is being requested, obviously 0.22 grams of CO2 is being emitted. Because obviously this content needs to live somewhere on the server. Whenever somebody requests it, the data has to be retrieved, has to be sent through the network, and also has to be displayed on somebody's machine, right? If I, let's say, make it more difficult for people to find information, they will waste more time on that page or on the site. They'll be wasting more energy, right, by being on that site. Ultimately, the goal of the European Parliament is to reduce traffic to the site, so it's not really necessary. We could reduce the amount of people coming to the site, but still finding the right answer about law, about how to vote, about regulations, and so on. That would be ideal. And there are many, many, many different flavors of that. When we had to do research, when we were doing research on that, that was a really difficult field to explore. This is actually quite an important field at this point, of course. But to many organizations and companies, this is an uncharted territory. This is like, we have no idea what that means, so let's put it on hold here somewhere, right? Everybody's very much afraid of what it changes, because it's not just about waste and undead content and poorly structured content, maybe duplications that we have all over the place, right? It's also about the cost of production. What's the point of having 5 people publishing press releases that are never read or viewed by anybody? Right? There's no point. There's like a really, really big effort behind it, right? But what does it mean for us, for designers? Well, when I look at it, I think, all right, well, when I look at it, of course, we have a lot of all these videos, and we have more videos, and we also have audio, right? So, what could we do with it? Well, if we want to reduce waste, and we're looking at, again, task completion times, wouldn't that be great if we just kill everything? Right? That would have a great sustainability score, because there is nothing, but that's not the purpose, right? We need to make it better. So, what if we remove these images and stuff, but then we invest heavily in good search? Really good search, like search with filters. So ideally, you would start typing, and right from that search box on the homepage, you'll be able to get a specific fragment of a specific video with the person speaking, with a transcript, searchable transcript, which obviously is going to be not as heavy as video is, right? And so the idea is, could we maybe do something similar to this, right? Or this, where you kind of show the distribution of what might be relevant for a given time in different languages. Sometimes we can actually just kill video and replace it with audio altogether, right? Or even better, one thing we definitely could be doing is actually allowing people right away to search through transcript, because transcripts are everywhere, right, on the European Parliament site. So why don't we just support, instead of having people going through the video in 4K potentially, watching tons of video unnecessary, let them just skip and quickly jump to the specific segment that might be relevant to them. Right? That's kind of one of the ideas. Also, when you start doing research, you realize that many people who are watching the plenary, they don't necessarily even watch it, they're just listening to it in the background because it can last 6 to 7 hours. So why don't we just have an option audio only? Right? So we could do that. But then we again always measure the same thing, just how much time people need to get to that information that they actually need. I mean, I know that this is a bit different environment than when you're operating, but that will be kind of the process. But the one thing that really is critical here, right, that I kind of want to finish off, is that all of this is, okay, this is just the mock-ups and the ideas, right? They're easy to do. We don't need to design anything until we get an approval and until we get the commitment to kind of do that, right? And until we have these instructions and things in place. And ultimately, right, I go ahead and I define things like this. Design KPIs, where you basically see the design initiatives that we have at the bottom, like establish your calling and deletion policy, revisit the tutorial guidelines, review the quality of error messages, revisit filtering gaps, iterate on tree testing for navigation, and so on. And then we need to measure it. So we need to look at navigation tree testing success rate, usage rate of filters, search result quality of top 100 queries, frequency of errors, error recovery speed, accuracy of data, and goes up and up and up and up, right? To the point that ultimately at the very top, you'll get business objectives. Business objective was to improve navigation and search. So I translated it as total successful, I didn't even hold it properly, total success rate or 80%. Right? So if you haven't done this before, that's a nice way to visualize what you're doing, and that's important, to visualize the impact of your work. Because very often we feel like we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then eventually, hopefully it's going to, make a difference, right? But I'm taking this and presenting this to the management. I need to get an approval that this makes sense to them. And that creates not only a shared understanding within the design team, right? But it also creates an understanding about the entire domain or directive in which I'm operating, right? That's actually very important. And sometimes it gets really complicated. Let me just show you this final one here, or what it could look like. I can only emphasize one more time just how important it actually can be. If I go at this here, I wouldn't even imagine the world in which I wouldn't do something similar. I think it would be this one. That's what it could look like. And I know it looks daunting, but it's not just me doing that. Usually this is, you can see it as a visualization of the design effort that an entire organization is focused on for the particular quarter or particular year towards that business goal that is all at the top. And that's what we ultimately try to sell. Because if you start going on with some initiatives, you need to have the argumentation to explain why you're doing this and not something else. So you really need to frame it as a business goal. Your design ideas are not there to just do design. They ultimately make an impact, but it needs to be very, very clear what kind of impact we're doing here. So those activities at the bottom, we have these measurements, which are metrics we're using. We're kind of putting them into KPIs. Sometimes multiple metrics can flow to KPI. And then ultimately you kind of connect the dots to go all the way up. It's a different project, but the idea is, if you want to reach that goal, which is basically just getting more sign-ups, right? You have here your frustration score. If you want more people to sign up, you need to reduce frustration that they have. Right? That's not surprising. If you want more people to sign up, you also need them to see the value of your product faster. Right? So we need to measure time to success moments and speed it up. Right? Or also, another thing that could help here is, of course, things like referrals rate. So if we can speed that up, we can also go and improve the ratio of people who are signing up. And from there, we're moving towards design activities that we're doing here. Right? I don't know if you've ever seen something like this before. This is actually coming from marketing, but it's extremely powerful. And that's a great way to get the promotion. Right? I'm just saying, because you're now visualizing the impact of your work very clearly in business terms that business understands. That's something that I think we're missing, because we often put ourselves in the heart of everything, but if we were, then we should know enough about other domains as well. And that's kind of a way to do just that. Right? Whew. Okay, this, I got a little too emotional, I guess, at this point, right? Just to wrap up here, right? You know, when we're talking about all these things, and complex interfaces and everything, it's kind of it's a big thing, right? It's an incredibly huge topic. I've put a lot of the things that are related to, in some way or the other, in this video course that I was working on for the last, I don't know, 3 years, right here. So smart interface design patterns. So you can take a look at it, and if you don't want to pay, that's okay too. There's also a blog where you can find a lot of stuff around it. So if you want to take a screenshot or something, smart interface design patterns or photo, there's a lot of stuff that I've actually been putting together specifically focused on complex interfaces, right? So that hopefully will be helpful. Here's another one, just mentioning it, just in case, just saying. But what's important about it, right, is that over the last like 20 years that I've been doing this, it's always the same. There are always the same things that people care about, right? They care about things that are calm, fast, and accessible. They care about large navigable text, checkboxes, large radio buttons, input boxes that look like input boxes, focus and active state, simple process requirements. It's always the same story. It has never changed, ever, right? It just feels like very often we're reinventing the wheel for the sake of trends, forgetting about some things that are really, really critical that we should not be dismissing, right? If we just get that right, we can do a lot of really, really good stuff in the world, as they always saying, right? Okay, can I have just 2 more minutes? All right. I want to inspire you, like really by breaking all kind of expectations, because I think if we often think about that this being representative for boring, it doesn't have to be, right? This is probably the weirdest pop-up I've seen in my life. And I like it so much, I wish it was on every other website, right? On every other one. Because it's so annoying, it's so frustrating, I love it. Just can't stop looking at it. It's so nice in so many different ways, right? And then you of course get sites like this. Like type in the date of birth, and you can type in 32nd day of 43rd month, 1557. They don't care, they know you're going to lie, so they just let you in, right? But you can twist it. You can create incredible emotional connections, right? So this is Austin Beer Works. You know, you go on the site and ask, are you 21 or not? And if you say, well, I am, then you just enter the site. But if not, well, let's have a conversation. Right? Right? And you know it's easy to do, relatively easy to do. Right? And it keeps going and going and going. Yeah, pardon the language here. Right? This is a little bit too much, maybe. Right? But then there is no way to click yes anymore, so you have to go through. And, you know, in the end, you basically get a stare. It's easy to do, but it creates this emotional, incredible emotional connection, right? The same thing here, Borden, which is an e-commerce retailer from the UK, right? What could be more boring in the entire universe than title selector? Nothing is more boring in the entire universe, I'm sure. Well, not for Borden. Let's see, who would you like to be today, right? Do you feel like a princess, or would you like to be Earl or Field Marshal Lord? Any preferences? And it's like a huge one. It's 75 options that you have there, right? And then you get all, you know, those little fine things. This is neat. So you start typing, and you have this little character that interacts with it, right? And you know, very often we have this idea that we shouldn't make people think. Coming from Steve Crook in the 90s, and of course he's right, right? Who am I to say that he's wrong? Of course he's right, but sometimes there is a value in interrupting and slowing down people a little, so they just at least have a chance to connect with us emotionally, right? That's actually very, very nice. The same goes like just, you know, sometimes make people wait nicely. There's nothing that's going to happen, it's just waiting, right? But that's nice in a way. Or this, you know, this checkbox or button. Yes, I would like to subscribe to your newsletter, or I would not like to subscribe to your newsletter, right? Let's make it more difficult for people to subscribe. right? So if they do have to click, let's say 7 or 8 times to subscribe to your newsletter, oh, they will remember that they subscribe to your email newsletter, right? Yeah, I mean, you don't have to make it that difficult, but you know, that character has a character, right? So there is that. All right, well, I think it's enough of me. I was speaking way too much already. I bring some friendly cats and meow, and thank you so much for being here, and I hope that some of those things were helpful to you. Theo, do you have any questions? In life?
You know what, I'm just excited to hear.
Sure.
Thanks very much for your talk. A very specific question on the KPIs. It's easy to kind of bring them down from those business objectives into increase or decrease time on top tasks. But who or how do you decide what that value is? So reduce by 15%. Where does that
Yeah, that's a very good question, because very often when I work in organizations, there is this idea of OKRs. Anybody using OKRs? Yeah. So you have this objective and you have your key results. In some organizations, key results are defined or shaped, I would rather say, or informed by designers or by teams who are actually going to implement it. Sometimes it's not the case at all. Sometimes they're basically given to you and they're nothing else than magic numbers. I think in many ways they represent the level of aggression you want to take when you want to approach that objective. So if you're given, let's say, an objective to reduce costs or improve the usage of filters, let's say, by 50%, that means, oh, we expect an aggressive, alternative, radical design approach to do this. If it's like 10%, refine, fix, improve. So it's kind of more like a level of aggression. When it's a weird word to use here, but kind of level of how heavily do you want to take it on, right? But the good point that you did bring in is that I find it very difficult to move both ways, both from the top and from the bottom, because very often when we're designing anything, when we think about design initiatives, we're very good in brainstorming. We can come up with ideas relatively quickly if we have done enough research, right? We know what to do then at some point, not how it will look like, but we know where we want to go. But the problem is when you actually want to connect it with the business, you need to bring somebody in who understands the business well. So we run workshops where we bring developers, QA, PM, and anybody who is, knows the business analysts maybe, right, to create this connection, to help us establish that connection. That's a good exercise because it creates a very shared environment for everybody, both designers and people who are living on a business level, of what we're doing. Because what I found in some projects is that there is a fundamental lack of trust in me as a designer, not in terms of I don't know how to draw pixels on the screen, but designers understanding what business needs or translating business needs properly in what would be then good design initiatives. So I think there is a very strong lack of trust in that regard, especially when you're working, right? But then if you can show that you think about those things, that you don't design just in a vacuum, just thinking about user flows of, making it prettier, nicer, cleaning up, right? Then it's a different position in which you're in. And I think that very often, especially in the world of enterprise UX, right? To me, it feels like the worst thing you can do as a designer is oversimplify, because people do not want simplification. If anything, they might want more features or more options to do things, right? So it's not the point of cleaning up. You might look at some interfaces and say, oh, this looks horrible. Yeah, but it works, right? So the point that my work is usually not to make it nicer in any way, although aesthetics is of course important. I'm not dismissing. But the point is to bring people to faster success. That's pretty much what I'm hired for. And that's what I'm being driven by. I don't know if I kind of call this keep going.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for the very inspiring talk. I had two detailed questions as being a UX designer. I was very curious, how do you measure your design system health score, and how do you review the quality of your error messages? Very curious to that.
Yes. Thank you, very, very good question. So, design system health score is a big story. Luckily, I have slides on that. Yes. So, if you look at design systems, very often, let's see if this is the one. Yeah, here we go. Very often, this is what I've discovered in my research, how different teams measure design system health. There are all these different ways. I'm not saying that we should do all of that, by no means. Right? Expression, if you like. But it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that everything from here is relevant. But very often we think about situations like, you know, if you have, let's say, if you're using Figma, right? How many designers on the team actively use Figma plugin or Figma design system that we have in Figma, right? That could be difficult to measure. On the other hand, you have things like design consistency that is being measured. Just how many shades of a color do we have? How many different type sizes do we have and things like that. Okay, I'm not trying to make enemies here, but I would say that sometimes it's perfectly fine to be inconsistent if you know that this is going to help people find what they need to do or do what they need to do, right? Some people will say, well, we have an image or button top in the header. God forbid putting it in the footer again. Why not? Yeah, if people actually, if you have, let's say, a very long article, and people might not be able to find it on the top because they will not go to the top, let's put it in the footer. There's no harm. So inconsistency is, you know, we don't want to be having 76 different reds on our pages, of course, or sites, but it's difficult. It's really difficult to measure. So one thing that did work, and it seems to be kind of the most efficient one, is number 6. That's relative design adoption. It's actually coming from the team at Pinterest, because the team at Pinterest decided to use this as a measure. They take basically every mockup that has been produced over the last 2 weeks by designers, right? That were also marked as complete or finished, right? And then they just look at, from what they have on the screen in the flow that they have been designing, right? How many of the components or elements that are in the mockup are coming from the design system relative to not coming to the design system? That's kind of their score, if you like. They call it relative adoption rate. So that basically tells you just how active people are in reusing components over and over. But it's not, it's only marked, again, for components that are marked as finished. Because obviously many designers will just iterate, they will just explore, they will just do something. That's not necessarily a sign that they're using or not using the design system. But whenever something goes into development, but we can track just, okay, how many of the components from the design system are we actually using there? Right? In fact, they even open sourced, I think open sourced, a tool that's called Fixed Stats. Oh, sorry, not them. There is a tool that's called Fixed Stats where you can actually fill in data in, like that, right? And you can create this kind of charts. Oh, now it works much better for some. Sorry if you couldn't hear me earlier. So you get a situation here where you have this adoption, this adoption as they call it, and you can track it over time. That's actually pretty significant. It's very interesting. But it seems to be working really well for them. And in fact, the same tool would also flow into development because there is also a way to surface it in terms of React components or whatever else you're using. So you can actually, when you're deploying, you can say component adoption was 27% for that flow. That's pretty cool, right? An alternative for that, just to show the slide, is this one, which is kind of a wonderful summary by Nathan Curtis about different ways of measuring success with the design system across different domains. From productivity of the team, to coverage of components, to efficiency of the team, satisfaction of the team, consistency and quality, right? It's like at scale, right? And the second question was about error rates, or errors in general. Now, typically what we do is, we're basically just looking at, okay, first of all, how many errors occur during a journey? Because we usually can plug it in, or we can plug in the tracking for the types of errors that appear. And then what happens is, if we know that some errors are most popular or most frequent, we start revisiting them. Usually we bring a UX writer on board. We start revisiting them and then see, okay, let's roll it out. Let's track in the next month or next week, depending on how much traffic you get or users. It actually helps with recovery. And still, like again, looking at time completion as well. It's kind of always the same story about that success rate, that's completion for us. The interesting thing is, I've never seen more impact from design work than from actually heavily iterating on error messages. They can be extremely impactful and extremely, way better than anything else they do in design. Way more impactful. It's just most companies don't really care enough, I guess, about that. That's very, very significant. Whew, more questions. Yes.
This is a very specific question about how you were testing the before your design work and afterwards when you had the Zoom calls with the testers. And I was wondering, if you were interviewing this group of like these 6 different people, and then you measured the time that it took to reply these super concrete answers, and then after you do the redesign, you ask this same group, or are they already like so they already know what the company does a little bit, or do you pick like a completely fresh target group to measure the time they took?
Yes, very good question. Yeah, so that would always be a fresh group. So we'll take the same segment. So we'll take 18 people from the same segment of, if you have a distribution of say frequent users, non-frequent users, and so on. Not the same people because they will be biased. So, and then depends because if you have access to users or not, in B2B or enterprises, that can be very difficult to get access to users. That's the very difficult part. Then what we do is we iterate or work more with sales and stakeholders. Because actually, it can go forever.
I know, right?
Just get something. Because very often we think that we know our users best. But what I learned is that actually, most of the time, it's sales. In B2B at least. In sales, it's usually sales who knows users much better than us. Because they speak to them all the time. Like all the time. So they get the requests, they get the feature demands, they get the problems. So they know users very well. The same goes for customer service. They know users really well as well, and what they need and what the problems are. We feel like we need to know users really well, but I think that very often we rely on the work that's done by others, and especially by user research. Right? But do not dismiss sales. I think they have a lot of hidden knowledge that's usually we don't even tap into. I mean, if you have sales. I don't know, maybe it's a public institution where you're working. And so.
Okay, great. On that note, can you just give a user output?
Thank you. Thanks so much.